Battle of Bannockburn. How a battle broke England's grip on Scotland. What happens when a king dies riding through a storm, his heir is a sickly child from Norway, and 14 nobles start sharpening their swords for the throne. Why did Scotland invite the most ruthless king in Europe, Edward Longshanks, to settle a royal dispute, only to end up with a puppet monarch and a war they never asked for? This is not just a battle, this is a reckoning. From the death of Alexander III to the thunderous clash at Bannockburn, this is the story of how Scotland clawed its way back from the brink, through betrayal, bloodshed, and battlefield brilliance. You'll meet knights who charged into their own archers, kings who fled through the mud, and warriors who held the line with nothing but pikes and pride. And yes, you'll witness the moment when Robert the Bruce, on a pony, split a charging knight's helmet in half with an axe. Because sometimes, history doesn't need embellishment. It just needs to be told right. It all began with a king who had everything. Alexander III, ruler of Scotland, had peace, prosperity, and a solid beard game. But in 1286, he decided to ride through the dark on a stormy night to see his new wife. Romantic? Yes. Reckless? Absolutely. He fell off his horse and died, leaving behind a kingdom and a very awkward succession problem. His only heir? Margaret, the Maid of Norway. A child so fragile she made parchment look sturdy. 4 years later, she died en route to Scotland, probably from illness, and with her went the last clear line to the throne. With no heir, Scotland turned into a medieval episode of The Bachelor, with 14 noble claimants vying for the crown. To avoid civil war, the Scots invited Edward I of England, known as Longshanks and Hammer of the Scots, to arbitrate. Edward, never one to miss a chance to expand his empire, saw Scotland as ripe for the picking. He chose John Balliol, a man with noble blood and, more importantly, a spine made of jelly. Edward expected him to be a loyal puppet. By 1295, Edward demanded Scottish troops and cash to fund his war with France. The Scottish nobles, already tired of being treated like Edward's personal ATM, told Balliol to grow a backbone. He did, barely, and signed a defense pact with France. Edward was not amused. He raised an army, marched north, and crushed the Scots at Dunbar like a man swatting flies. Balliol surrendered, was stripped of his crown, and sent to the Tower of London, where he probably spent his days regretting every decision he ever made. With Balliol gone, Scotland was under English control. But rebellion simmered. Then came William Wallace, a man with a sword, a cause, and absolutely no chill. In 1297, he defeated the English at Stirling Bridge, a victory so shocking it made Edward choke on his crown. Wallace was named Guardian of Scotland, and preparations began for a showdown with Edward. But Edward, fresh from a peace treaty with France, returned with a vengeance and defeated Wallace at Falkirk in 1298. Wallace resigned, and Scotland was once again leaderless. In 1306, Robert the Bruce, a descendant of King David Thirst, decided he'd had enough waiting. He met his rival John Comyn III in a church and promptly stabbed him to death at the altar. Not exactly holy behavior, but effective. With the support of some nobles and clergy, Bruce was crowned at Scone. His rebellion, however, started with a disaster. At Methven, his forces were crushed. At Dalry, they were nearly wiped out. Bruce fled to Rathlin Island, licking his wounds and probably talking to spiders for inspiration. Things got worse. His wife, daughter, and sisters were captured and handed over to Edward I. His brother Neil was executed. 2 more brothers tried to stir trouble in Galloway, but were ambushed and killed at Loch Ryan. But Bruce wasn't done. In 1307, he returned to the mainland with a handful of loyal men. He won at Glen Truel and Loudon Hill, gaining followers and territory. Then, like a plot twist from the heavens, Edward I died. The hammer of the Scots was finally dropped. Edward II inherited the throne and promptly inherited his father's enemies. Unlike his dad, he was indecisive, distracted, and deeply unpopular. Bruce used this lull to crush his Scottish rivals, including John Comyn, Earl of Buchan, and took Aberdeen in 1308. Over the next few years, Bruce dismantled English control castle by castle. He gave Scottish nobles a choice: swear loyalty or lose your lands. Most chose wisely. By 1314, only Bothwell and Stirling remained in English hands. Bothwell was isolated, so Bruce sent his brother Edward Bruce to besiege Stirling. The castle's governor, Philip Mowbray, agreed to surrender if not relieved by June 24th. Bruce was furious. That deadline gave Edward II a reason to act. And act he did, raising an army at Berwick, funded by a loan from the Pope and packed with supplies. As they marched north, the Scots burned everything in their path, leaving the English hungry and cranky. Bruce, facing an army twice his size, positioned his 7,000 men south of Stirling. He divided them into 4 schiltrons, tight formations of pike-wielding infantry, and waited. On June 23, Sir James Keith led 600 light horsemen to scout the English arrival. What they saw would set the stage for one of the most legendary battles in Scottish history. Now pause for a sec. Join the front lines of history and power. Welcome to European Battle, where epic clashes, legendary warriors, and untold stories come alive. By subscribing and turning on notifications, you're not just joining a channel, you're stepping into a world of thrilling battles. From ancient empires to modern warfare, we deliver cinematic storytelling, expert insights, and exclusive content that will leave you breathless. Don't just watch history, live it. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a moment of the action. European Battle, where legends clash. As the sun rose over the fields south of Stirling, the ground itself seemed to groan under the weight of 3,000 English horsemen, their armor glinting like fire in the morning light. Knights, men-at-arms, and war horses thundered forward, a sight so daunting it could make a hardened warrior reconsider his life choices. Behind them, 13,000 infantry and a swarm of Welsh archers poured out of the Torwood, descending onto the plain like a tide of iron and arrows. The English formation stretched for kilometers, a moving wall of death. In the vanguard, Hereford's heavy cavalry began their descent down the steep embankment of the Bannockburn stream, clambering up the opposite bank to find what looked like Scottish footmen retreating into the woods. A trap? A retreat? Or something far more cunning? On the English far right, Baron Clifford galloped along a hidden path with his mounted contingent, hoping to cut off the Scottish retreat to Stirling Castle. But back at the stream, something caught the eye of Sir Henry de Bohun, Hereford's nephew. A lone rider emerged in front of the Scottish lines. Not just any rider. It was King Robert the Bruce himself. Henry saw glory. He saw a chance to end the war with one well-placed lance. He lowered his helmet, pointed his weapon, and charged. Bruce, on a light gray palfrey, not even a war horse, had every reason to flee. But instead, he turned toward the oncoming knight. At the last moment, Bruce swerved, rose in his stirrups, and split Henry's helmet with a single blow of his axe. The axe shattered. Henry was dead before he hit the ground. The Scots roared, the English paused, and the tone of the battle changed. Hereford, still confident, pushed his cavalry forward. He believed the Scots would flee. But Bruce had prepared the field with pit traps, covered in branches, lining both sides of the road. As the English tried to form up, Bruce's schiltrons, tight formations of spearmen, surged forward like a living wall of spikes. Hereford's cavalry smashed into them and broke like waves on rocks. Horses fell into pits, knights were impaled. The road became a graveyard. Gloucester, seeing the chaos, tried to flank upstream, but Edward Bruce moved swiftly to protect his brother's flank. Unsure of the terrain and facing fresh resistance, the English fell back. On the Scottish left, Randolph realized, almost too late, that Clifford's cavalry was about to encircle his position. Furious at himself, he led his men out of the woods and formed a wall of spears. Clifford's knights circled, attacked, and failed. In frustration, they hurled everything, spears, maces, even swords, at the schiltron. It was like throwing pebbles at a fortress. Then Douglas arrived with reinforcements. Clifford's cavalry turned to meet them, and Randolph seized the moment. He charged through the broken ranks, scattering the English. The fighting of June 23 ended with Scottish morale soaring and English confidence shaken. Edward's army, still twice the size of Bruce's, needed rest. He moved half his forces into a marshy area across the Bannockburn, while the rest camped south of the stream. Bruce gathered his officers. Despite the day's success, he considered retreating into the wilderness. But then, a Scottish knight in English service defected, pledging his life that the English were demoralized and disorganized. Bruce turned to his men and asked, "Shall we fight or not?" They answered as one, "For battle." Morning broke with caution in the English camp. Gone was the arrogance of easy victory. Edward deployed his cavalry between the Pelstream ravine and a wooded area, with archers and infantry behind. Bruce gave the order, "Advance." It was madness. Infantry against heavy cavalry? But Bruce had trained his skiltrons to move in echelon formation, mobile, cohesive, and deadly. He sent his archers forward to draw fire. The English took the bait, shooting at the archers while the spearmen crept closer. Then came confusion. English commanders argued over who should lead the charge. Gloucester, impatient, charged ahead, followed by Clifford and others. They smashed into Edward Bruce's schiltron and were instantly killed. The cavalry was annihilated in minutes. Observers said the horses disappeared like men plunging into the sea. Bruce's formations pushed forward. Edward Bruce anchored his line to the Bannockburn stream, and other schiltrons followed. Bruce planned to trap the English between the Bannockburn and Pelstream. For hours, the Scots held firm. The physical toll was immense, but their discipline never wavered. The English cavalry, bruised and battered, could not break the wall of spears. The Scots edged forward, squeezing the English into a narrowing pocket of death. For most of the battle, the English archers, arguably the most dangerous force on the field, had been lounging like guests at a royal picnic. Their longbows, capable of shredding formations, hadn't been used properly. But finally, someone shouted, "Shoot the schiltrons!" The archers obeyed. Arrows flew and missed. The Scottish ranks were so narrow, the volleys sailed harmlessly overhead like angry birds with poor aim. So the order changed. Shoot past the cavalry, directly at the spearmen. Brilliant idea. Except, the English horsemen were towering over the Scottish footmen, effectively shielding them. The archers were now shooting their own knights in the back. Friendly fire, medieval edition. Still, the archers persisted, gradually moving across the Pelstream to find a better angle. But Robert the Bruce, ever watchful, saw the danger. He ordered his light cavalry under Mareschal Keith to disperse them. Keith crossed the Pelstream, his cavalry galloping with lances leveled, hooves pounding like war drums. The archers panicked. Those who weren't skewered fled across the stream, dropping bows and dignity alike. Keith didn't stop there. He patrolled the Pelstream, ensuring no more flanking attempts would threaten the Scottish lines. The trap was closing. The battle had now entered its attrition phase, the brutal grind where exhaustion weighs heavier than armor. The Scots, drained but determined, began to slow. Bruce knew he couldn't afford a stalemate. He played his final card. 2 fresh schiltrons held in reserve surged forward. Some filled the gaps in Douglas's spear lines. Others leaned with all their might against the backs of men whose knees were buckling. It was a human tide of iron and willpower. The English began to give ground. With the Scottish spearmen dangerously close to King Edward II, English commanders panicked. They ordered 500 knights to withdraw and protect the monarch. This noble gesture had a catastrophic effect. It guaranteed defeat and triggered a mass flight. The English army, once a wall of steel, became a stampede of fear. The English defeat opened the north of England to Scottish raids and paved the way for the Scottish invasion of Ireland. In the aftermath, Edward II released Robert's wife Elizabeth, his sisters Christina and Mary, and his daughter Marjorie, ending their 8-year imprisonment. And then came the crown jewel, the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton, signed in 1328. The English crown recognized Scotland's full independence and acknowledged Robert the Bruce, his heirs and successors, as the rightful rulers of the kingdom. Next up, the Battle of Crécy. But this tale doesn't end here. The winds of war will soon blow again, this time in France, where English longbows will carve a legend at Crécy. So if you've enjoyed this journey through blood, betrayal, and battlefield brilliance, don't forget to follow us, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling chapter of history brought to life. Because trust me, the next story is just as wild.